An obese teen is sold to a lonely giant rancher as punishment, but he had shocking plans. The crowd jeers on the courthouse steps, dust swirling in the hot sun. A father spits his shame, offering his own daughter like cattle. Just when it seems she's doomed, a towering rancher steps forward, placing a single silver dollar in the man's hand. Everyone expects cruelty, but what comes next stuns the entire town. In the quiet of his ranch house, instead of punishment, she finds bread on the table and a Bible waiting to be read. But her father isn't finished. Behind the laughter in the saloon and the whispers in the pews, darker schemes are at work, schemes tied to land, water, and a truth that could destroy them both. Is this girl's future nothing more than a cruel trade or the beginning of a family no one expected? What shocking plan could turn the punishment meant for shame into the greatest gift of her life? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments, your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing being part of something bigger than ourselves. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the courthouse steps as Nicole stood trembling, her father's iron grip bruising her arm. Sweat trickled down her neck, and her chest felt tight with panic. The gathered townspeople formed a half circle around them, their faces twisted with cruel amusement at the spectacle before them. "Ain't worth the food she eats," her father bellowed, giving her a rough shake. "Someone ought to get some use out of her, seeing as I can't." Nicole kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground, trying to make herself smaller despite her size. Each word from her father's mouth struck like a physical blow. The wooden steps beneath her feet seemed to sway as jeers and taunts rose from the crowd. The horse trader, a wiry man with yellowed teeth, stepped forward with a predatory grin. "I might take her off your hands," he drawled, looking Nicole up and down like she was a piece of meat. "Could always use another hand with the stock." Fresh tears welled in Nicole's eyes. She'd heard whispers about how the horse trader treated his workers, the bruises they bore, the haunted looks in their eyes. Her father's grip tightened as he started to respond, but a deep voice cut through the cruel chatter of the crowd. "One silver dollar." The words fell like stones into still water. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure standing at the edge of the gathering. William Black's broad shoulders cast a long shadow across the courthouse steps, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Nicole had seen him before, always from a distance, the quiet rancher who kept to himself since losing his wife. He stood straight and still, holding out a single silver coin that caught the harsh sunlight. Her father's mouth twisted. "You making fun, Black? Girl like this ain't worth $1 silver," William repeated, his voice firm but quiet. "Legal tender for the sale." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Nicole's heart hammered in her chest as she dared to glance up at William's face. His eyes held no mockery, no cruelty, just a steady calm that seemed to push back against the waves of shame washing over her. Her father snatched the coin from William's outstretched hand. "She's yours then. Good riddance." He shoved Nicole forward, causing her to stumble on the steps. Before she could fall, William's steady hand caught her elbow. In one fluid motion, he removed his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. The rough wool smelled of leather and hay, and its weight felt like armor against the staring eyes of the townspeople. "Come along," William said softly, guiding her toward a wagon parked at the hitching post. His hand remained gentle but firm on her arm, steadying her trembling steps. The crowd's whispers followed them down the street. Nicole caught fragments of their words, the widow Black and that fat girl, and what's he thinking? She hunched deeper into William's coat, trying to disappear. William helped her up onto the wagon seat, his movements careful and deliberate. Nicole perched on the edge, rigid with fear, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Surely he would show his true nature now, away from the watching crowd. Her whole body tensed, bracing for harsh words or rough handling. but William simply climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. "Hold on," he said, his voice still carrying that same quiet steadiness. The wagon creaked into motion, wheels crunching against the packed dirt of the street. Nicole stole glances at him as they rolled past the last buildings of town. His profile remained calm, focused on the road ahead. No anger darkened his features. No impatience tightened his jaw. She couldn't understand it. Everyone in her life had made sure she knew what a burden she was, how her size made her worthless and shameful. Yet this stranger had stepped forward to buy her, had sheltered her with his own coat, and now drove in peaceful silence as if purchasing a teenage squee. Girl at auction was the most natural thing in the world. The wagon rattled over a set of ruts, jostling them both. Nicole grabbed the seat's edge, and William's hand shot out to steady her. "Careful there," he said, then immediately returned his attention to the horses. That brief touch held no threat, no disgust. Nicole's mind whirled, unable to make sense of such gentle treatment. She watched the town shrink behind them, dust rising in their wake. The familiar buildings that had witnessed her shame grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared around a bend in the road. Still, William drove on in silence, heading into the open country where the late afternoon sun painted the prairie grass in shades of gold. Nicole remained perched on the edge of her seat, wrapped in his coat despite the heat, waiting for reality to assert itself, for the kindness to vanish like a cruel mirage. But William just drove steady and sure, letting the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves fill the space between them. His presence beside her felt solid and real, like the wooden seat beneath her or the wool coat around her shoulders. The road stretched ahead, leading away from everything she'd known, everything she'd been told about herself. The sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon as the wagon rolled onward. Nicole's legs began to ache from holding herself so rigidly, but she didn't dare relax. Her mind raced with questions she was too afraid to voice. Where were they going? What did he expect of her? When would the gentleness turn to scorn? The prairie? Wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. It felt like freedom, but freedom was a dangerous thing to hope for. She'd learned that lesson too many times before. So she sat and waited and watched the road unfold before them, carrying her away from the courthouse steps and into an uncertain future with this quiet stranger who had swept into her life like an unexpected dawn after the darkest night. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as shadows lengthened across the prairie. Nicole sat rigid on the wooden seat, her muscles aching from holding herself so still. The afternoon heat gave way to evening's cooler breath, making her shiver despite William's coat around her shoulders. William glanced her way, his expression gentle in the fading light. "Still a fair piece to go," he said softly. "Getting chilly now. There's a wool blanket behind the seat if you'd like it." Nicole hesitated, then reached back with trembling fingers to pull out the rough blanket. She expected him to snatch it away to laugh at her presumption, but William kept his eyes on the road ahead. Handling the reins with steady hands, the sun sank lower, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. William occasionally pointed out landmarks, a lightning-struck tree, a creek crossing, a distant line of cottonwoods that marked the boundary of his land. His voice remained quiet, as if he were speaking to a spooked colt, just as dusk settled over the prairie. They crested a small rise. Below them sat a weathered ranch house, its single window glowing with lamplight. A barn stood nearby, its dark shape solid against the darkening sky. William drew the horses to a halt in front of the house. "Home," he said simply, climbing down. From the wagon, he circled around to help Nicole descend, his hands steady but not demanding as she clambered down. "Let me show you inside." Nicole followed him up the wooden steps to the porch, her heart pounding. The door creaked open to reveal a kitchen lit by the promised lamp. A cast-iron stove sat against one wall, its black surface reflecting the light. A wooden table with 4 chairs stood in the center, its surface scrubbed clean. "Kitchen here," William said, moving through the room. "Pumps just outside for water. Barns where we'll milk the cow come morning." He led her down a short hallway, stopping at a door. "This room's yours." Nicole stared as he opened the door. A real bed stood against the wall, piled with colorful quilts. A small table held another lamp, unlit. The wooden floor was swept clean, no dirt floor like she'd expected. No pile of straw in the corner. "I'll fetch your things," William said, leaving her to stare at the room. Her room. Oh, she heard his boots on the porch, then the sound of him returning. He set her small bundle just inside the door. "Superel, be ready soon. You can wash up, if you'd like soaps by the pump." Nicole stood frozen until his footsteps retreated to the kitchen. Only then did she dare to touch the quilts, to run her fingers over the neat stitching. The room smelled of cedar and clean cotton, not mold or livestock. She kept waiting for William to return, to tell her it was a joke, to show her the real place she'd be sleeping. But only the sounds of William moving in the kitchen reached her ears, the clatter of a pan, the creak of the stove door. Finally, his voice called softly, "Supper's ready. If you're hungry." She crept to the kitchen, where William had set out 2 plates. Steam rose from bowls of beans, and a pan of cornbread sat in the center of the table. William stood behind one chair, waiting. "Let's thank the Lord," he said quietly. Nicole bowed her head automatically as William spoke. "Lord, we thank you for this food and your provision. Amen." He remained silent for a moment longer, his head still bowed, and Nicole saw a flash of deep pain cross his features before he raised his eyes. She recognized that look grief had worn the same channels in her mother's face before. Illness took her. William sat and gestured to the other chair. "Please, eat while it's warm." Nicole perched on the edge of the chair, watching William from beneath her lashes as she took tiny bites. She waited for him to comment on how she ate, to criticize her size, to mock her careful movements. Her father's voice rang in her memory. "Greedy girl, eating more than your share again." But William simply ate his own meal, breaking his cornbread into careful pieces. When Nicole's spoon scraped the bottom of her bowl, he asked quietly, "Would you like more cornbread?" She shook her head quickly, though her stomach still felt hollow. William didn't press, just finished his own meal in companionable silence. After showing her where to find the dish soap and towels, William bid her good night. "Sleep well," he said. "Breakfast is at sunrise, but don't fret if you sleep late." Been a long day. Nicole retreated to her room, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. She changed into her nightdress with shaking fingers, then slid beneath. The quilts. The bed was soft, the blankets clean and warm. Yet sleep eluded her. The silence felt wrong after years of her father's drunken shouting, her siblings crying. Out in the darkness, a coyote's howl rose and fell, wild and lonely. Nicole pulled the quilts tighter around her shoulders, caught between the fear she knew so well and this strange new feeling. Could it be safety? Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Useless girl, not worth the space you take up." But here in this quiet room, with its clean floors and soft bed, those words seemed to lose some of their power. The coyote called again, closer now, reminding her that she was far from everything familiar. She lay awake long into the night, trying to understand William's gentle manner, his quiet offers of food and comfort. The lamp's light in the kitchen had gone dark, but somehow its warmth lingered in her memory, like William's steady hands helping her from the wagon, like his coat around her shoulders, like the simple kindness of being offered more cornbread without mockery or conditions. Sleep finally came as she listened to the night sounds of her new home, the creak of the house settling, the whisper of wind in the eaves, and the distant coyote song echoing across the prairie. The rooster's crow pierced the dawn, startling Nicole from her sleep. Sunlight was already creeping through her window, and panic seized her chest. She was late. Her fingers fumbled with her dress buttons as she rushed to make herself presentable. Back home, sleeping late meant harsh words and harsher consequences. The kitchen floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she hurried in. William stood at the stove, his broad shoulders relaxed as he poured coffee into 2 cups. He turned at her entrance, offering a gentle nod. "Good morning," he said, extending one of the cups. "Milk's on the table if you'd like to cut the strength." Nicole accepted the cup with trembling hands, waiting for reproach about her tardiness. But William simply moved to the door, pausing to pull on his boots. "Thought we might start with feeding the chickens," he said. "They're carrying on something fierce this morning." Outside, the air held the crisp sweetness of early day. William led her to a feed bin near the chicken coop, demonstrating how to scatter the grain in wide arcs. The hens rushed forward, pecking and clucking, their feathers catching the morning light. "Your turn," William said, stepping back. Nicole reached into the bin, trying to copy his smooth movement. The feed scattered unevenly, most falling in a clumped pile. Heat rose in her cheeks, but William simply nodded. "That's right. Just open. Your fingers a bit more next time. They'll eat it either way." Next came the calves, 3 of them in a pen near the barn. William showed her how to pump water into a pail and carry it to their trough. The bucket was heavy, sloshing against her skirts as she walked. Near the pen, her foot caught on an uneven patch of ground. She stumbled, the pail tipping precariously. Before water could spill, William's steady hand caught her elbow, helping her right herself. "Easy now," he said. "No harm done. These paths take some getting used to." After the morning chores, they returned to the kitchen. William disappeared briefly into another room and returned with a well-worn Bible and a slim book she recognized. As a primer, he set them carefully on the table. "Thought we might work on your letters," he said, pulling out a chair. "If you're willing." Nicole's throat tightened. She stared at her hands, shame burning in her chest. Her father had always mocked her inability to read, calling her simple. She started, voice barely a whisper. "I don't know any of them." "That's why we're starting at the beginning," William said, his voice carrying the same patience he'd shown with the chores. "Every person who reads had to learn their letters first." He opened the primer, pointing to the first page where large letters marched across the paper. "This here's he said, like the sound at the start of Apple. They spent an hour at the table, William naming letters and Nicole repeating them. He never sighed in frustration when she forgot, never raised his voice when she confused similar shapes. Instead, he told her stories to remember them by how B looked like 2 bowls stacked together, how M reminded him of mountain peaks. The rest of the day filled with simple tasks. William showed her how to stack firewood against the house, explaining how to check for rot and snakes. In the kitchen, he taught her to knead bread, his large hands demonstrating the motion before letting her try. The dough stuck to her fingers, but he simply showed her how to dust them with more flour. As evening approached, Nicole sat at the table with the primer again, a lamp casting warm light over the pages. Her eyes burned from focusing on the strange shapes, but pride flickered in her chest. She recognized some of them now. A and B and M were becoming familiar friends. William's shadow fell across the table as he set out plates for supper. The bread they'd made together sat warm in the center, next to a pot of beans. Nicole's stomach growled at the smell, but she waited as William bowed his head to pray. "Lord," he began, his voice soft, "thank you for this food," and he paused, something catching in his throat. 4 family gathered at this table, pain flashed across his features, quick but deep, before he finished the prayer. Nicole saw his hands clench briefly on the tablecloth, saw the way he swallowed hard before raising his head. Questions burned on her tongue about what sorrow lay behind his eyes, but she held them back. She recognized grief's raw edges, knew how words could tear them wider. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons and the distant sounds of night settling over the prairie. Nicole felt the day's work in her muscles, an honest ache different from the weariness of fear she'd known before. Her fingers still smelled of bread dough, and in her mind, she could trace the shapes of letters she'd learned as she helped clear. The dishes, a new sound carried through the darkness, hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Nicole's shoulders tensed, her hands tightening on the plate she held. William seemed to notice her unease, his expression turning thoughtful as he moved toward the window. The sound grew closer, stirring memories of other nights when unexpected visitors had brought trouble to her father's door. Nicole stood frozen. By the sink, water dripping from her fingers as the hoofbeats drew nearer through the gathering dark. The hoofbeats from the previous night belonged to Sheriff Dunn, who returned the next morning as the sun climbed over the eastern pasture. His horse's bridle jingled as he dismounted, his weathered face set in grim lines. William met him at the front gate, while Nicole watched anxiously from the kitchen window. "Morning, William," the sheriff said, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Need to have a word, if you don't mind." William nodded, gesturing toward the porch. The two men settled into the wooden chairs, their conversation carrying through the open window where Nicole stood frozen, straining to hear every word. "There's trouble brewing in town," Sheriff Dunn began, his voice heavy. "Nicole's father is raising a fuss about the sale. Claims he wasn't in his right mind, says the whole thing wasn't proper-like." William's jaw tightened, though his voice remained steady. The man offered his daughter up like cattle. Everyone saw it. "That they did," the sheriff agreed, shifting uncomfortably. "But there's talk going round, William. Ugly talk. Folks wondering why a man your age would take in a young girl like that." Nicole's chest tightened at the words. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her heart hammering. "You know me better than that, Sheriff," William said quietly, but there was steel in his tone. "I do," Dunn acknowledged. "But the law, well, it ain't always clear in cases like this. And there's that horse trader who passed through yesterday, making noise about how he had first claim when her daddy offered her." William stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the porch boards. "That man trades in misery, and you know it." "I ain't arguing that point," the sheriff said, raising his hands. "Just warning you what's coming. The territorial judge won't be through for another month, and until then, he left the sentence hanging." Nicole couldn't bear to listen any more. She fled to the barn, her vision blurred with tears. The familiar smell of hay and leather surrounded her as she crumpled onto a bale, sobs racking her body. The thought of being dragged back to town, of being handed over to the horse trader, sent waves of terror through her. She didn't hear William approach until his shadow fell across the barn floor. He stood in the doorway, concern etched on his features. "Nicole," he said gently, "I want you to hear this plain. I won't let them take you." She looked up at him through tear-streaked eyes. "But the sheriff said the sheriff says what the law might do." William interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "But you're not property to be traded. You're a child of God, and I aim to protect you." Fresh tears spilled down Nicole's cheeks, but these felt different, not born of fear, but of something she barely recognized. Hope, maybe. Or gratitude. William moved to the workbench, picking up a worn leather harness strap. "Come here," he said. "Let me show you something useful to keep your mind occupied." Nicole wiped her eyes with her apron and joined him. He demonstrated how to examine the leather for weak spots, showing her where the stitching had come loose. See? Here, he pointed to a frayed section. We'll need to replace these threads. First, we remove the old ones, careful not to damage the leather. He guided her through the process, teaching her how to thread the heavy needle, how to make the special knots that would hold under strain. The familiar scent of leather oil filled her nose as they worked, and gradually her hands stopped shaking. My father taught me this, William said quietly as they finished the repair. Said a good harness could mean the difference between life and death out here. Everything we fix, we make stronger. Nicole understood he wasn't just talking about the leather. She ran her fingers over their completed work, feeling the sturdy stitches they'd created together. The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and lessons. William kept her busy, as if hoping physical work would keep her fears at bay. They fed the animals, checked fence posts, and he even showed her how to brush down his horse, explaining how to move around the large animals safely. As evening approached, William prepared a thick beef stew, the savory smell filling the kitchen. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. Nicole noticed how William positioned himself facing the window, his eyes occasionally scanning the darkening yard like a shepherd watching for wolves. When night fell, Nicole retreated to her room, the day's events weighing heavy on her mind. She lay in bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house settling and wheeled William's steady footsteps as he made one final check of the property before turning in. Tears came again as she stared into the darkness. But they were mixed tears now. Fear of what might come, yes, but also deep gratitude for this man who had become her protector. For the first time in her life, someone was standing firmly on her side, ready to fight for her. She buried her face in her pillow, which grew damp with her tears. Through the window, a coyote called mournfully in the distance. But instead of feeling frightened as she had that first night, she found comfort in the wild sound. Like her, it was free under the vast Colorado sky, even if that freedom felt uncertain. Sleep eventually came. Her dreams filled with images of leather straps being sewn whole again, of strong hands teaching patience, and of a quiet voice promising protection against the gathering storm. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the ranch. William announced over breakfast that they needed supplies from town, and Nicole's stomach knotted at the thought of facing those familiar streets again. Still, she knew they couldn't hide at the ranch forever. The morning sun warmed their backs. As William hitched the horses to the wagon, he helped Nicole up onto the wooden seat, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge. "Ain't nothing to fear," he said quietly, settling beside her. "We'll be quick about it." The wagon wheels creaked as they set off down the dusty road. Nicole watched the landscape change from open pasture to scattered homesteads. Then finally, to the outskirts of town. Her heart began to race as they approached the main street. The usual bustle of town life slowed as their wagon rolled past. Women paused in their conversations, and men stopped mid-stride to stare. Nicole heard the whispers start, like leaves rustling in a dry wind. "That's Black's girl, the one from the auction. Can you imagine?" William guided the horses to a stop in front of Jensen's General Store. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. And Nicole instinctively moved closer to William's shadow. The store smelled of coffee beans and leather, with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling packed with goods. Old Mr. Jensen barely looked up from his ledger as William began collecting their supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, and a new box of rifle cartridges. Nicole stood awkwardly by a barrel of dried apples, trying to make herself smaller as other customers whispered behind raised hands. The door chimed again, and Mrs. Halpern swept in, her gray-streaked hair neat beneath her bonnet. The preacher's wife paused when she saw Nicole, then smiled warmly. "Why, hello there, dear," she said, approaching with genuine kindness in her eyes. "I'm Mrs. Halpern. I'm so pleased to finally meet you properly." Nicole mumbled a shy greeting, surprised by the gentle welcome. Mrs. Halpern reached into her reticule and pulled out a length of blue ribbon. "I thought you might like this," she said, pressing it into Nicole's hands. "Every young lady needs something pretty." Nicole stared at the ribbon in wonder. It was the color of summer sky, soft and silky. Between her fingers, "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered, struggling to find words for such unexpected kindness. "You're most welcome, dear," Mrs. Halpern replied. "And you must come to Sunday services soon. We'd love to have you join us." William returned with their supplies packed in a wooden crate. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Halpern, a silent thanks in his eyes for her kindness to Nicole as they stepped back onto the boardwalk. A group of young men lounging against the hitching post began to snicker. Nicole recognized them from town, sons of merchants and ranchers who had always looked through her as if she were invisible. "Hey, Black," one called out, just loud enough to carry that wagon axle holding up under the weight. Their cruel laughter cut through the air like a whip. Nicole felt her face flush hot with shame, and she clutched the blue ribbon tightly in her fist. William set down the crate with deliberate care. When he turned, his voice carried the low rumble of distant thunder. "You boys got something to say?" he asked, drawing himself up to his full height. His massive frame seemed to fill the entire boardwalk. "Because I reckon you might want to think real careful about your next words." The young men's smirks faded as William took a step toward them. They looked suddenly young and foolish, shrinking under his stern gaze. "No, sir," one of them muttered. Just leaving. They scattered like quail, trying to maintain their dignity as they hurried away. William watched them go, then turned back to Nicole with gentler eyes. "Don't pay them no mind," he said softly. "Their mothers ought to be ashamed of their manners." The ride home was quiet, with Nicole lost in thought. She held the blue ribbon in her lap, running her thumb over its smooth surface. The kindness of Mrs. Halpern seemed to weigh equally with the cruel words of the young men. As if her heart couldn't quite decide which to believe, as evening settled over the ranch, Nicole helped prepare supper without being asked. She laid the table carefully, making sure the plates and cups were set just so. Several times she tried to thank William for defending her, but the words stuck in her throat like honey. Instead, she showed her gratitude in small ways, an extra careful fold of his napkin, the coffee poured just how he liked it, the bread sliced neat and even. William seemed to understand. He bowed his head for the evening prayer. And Nicole noticed how his voice carried a special warmth when he thanked the Lord for their safe return home. The blue ribbon lay beside her plate throughout the meal, a reminder that even in a world of cruel words and harsh judgments, kindness could appear unexpectedly. Like wildflowers after rain, the days began to settle into a comfortable pattern at the ranch. Each morning, Nicole woke to rooster crows and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. She found herself rising earlier now, her body adjusting to ranch life's natural rhythms. William proved to be a patient teacher. One crisp morning, he showed her how to check the fence lines, his calloused hands demonstrating how to test the wire's tension. "See here," he explained, plucking the strand like a guitar string. "Too loose, and the cattle will push right through. Too tight, and it'll snap in the first frost." Nicole's fingers, still soft from town life, grew stronger as she learned to grip the pliers and twist the wire just so. The first time she secured a loose post on her own, satisfaction bloomed in her chest like a warm flower. The water pump became her next challenge. At first, the handle fought her, requiring all her weight to bring forth even a trickle. But day by day, her arms grew stronger. Soon she could fill 2 buckets without stopping to rest, though the walk back to the house still left her breathing hard. In the kitchen, William taught her the art of bread making. "My mother showed me this," he said quietly one afternoon, demonstrating how to knead the dough with steady, rhythmic motions. Said every ranch needs fresh bread to feel like home. Nicole found peace in the routine, mixing flour and water, adding yeast, working the dough until it felt alive under her hands. Sometimes she caught William watching her work, a ghost of a smile touching his lips when she got the technique just right. The reading lessons took place each evening after supper. When the day's work was done, William kept a shelf of worn primers, their pages soft with age and use. He would sit beside her at the kitchen table, lamp turned high, as Nicole struggled through simple sentences. The cat sees the. She would sound out carefully, her finger trailing beneath each word. Mouse, William would supply gently when she hesitated too long. Remember, when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. One evening, after several false starts, Nicole successfully read a short Bible verse aloud. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The words came slow but sure, and pride swelled in her chest when she finished. "Well done," William said over their evening meal, his deep voice warm with approval. "You're coming along fine." Nicole beamed at the praise, though she quickly ducked her head to hide her smile. Such words still felt foreign after years of her father's sharp criticism. His voice echoed in her memory. "Stupid girl, can't even read her own name." The old shame crept back, dampening her joy. That night, William lingered at the table after the dishes were cleared. He seemed lost in thought, turning something over in his weathered hands. Finally, he held it out to Nicole, a small, silver-framed photograph. "This was Sarah," he said softly. "My wife." Nicole carefully took the frame. A young woman smiled back at her, dark-haired and pretty, wearing a high-collared dress. Her eyes seemed to sparkle even in the faded image. "She died bringing our son into the world," William continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Neither of them survived the night." His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he accepted the photograph back. Nicole sat very still, understanding the weight of what he'd shared. His loss echoed her own pain of rejection, different yet somehow the same, the ache of being left behind, of not being enough. Later that night, sleep eluded her. The house creaked its familiar evening songs, but Nicole felt restless. Wrapping a quilt around her shoulders, she slipped outside into the star-strewn night. The air was crisp with approaching autumn, carrying the scent of sage and distant pine. Nicole found herself sinking to her knees in the dirt, face turned upward, to the vast sky. For the first time in years, words of prayer came to her lips. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know if you're listening. Pa always said you had no time for the likes of me." Oh, she paused, gathering courage. "But if you are, if you can hear me, could this place be home? Could I belong here?" The stars wheeled silently overhead, ancient and patient. Cool breeze stirred her hair, carrying away some of the heaviness in her heart. The night felt different somehow, less threatening, more like a soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders. When Nicole finally stood, her knees dirty from kneeling, something had shifted inside her. The ranch house glowed softly in the darkness, its single lamp in the window a beacon calling her back. She clutched the quilt tighter and walked toward that light, toward the possibility of belonging it represented. Inside, the floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she made her way back to her room. From down the hall came the sound of William's quiet snoring, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. Nicole slipped into bed, the quilt still wrapped around her shoulders, and found that sleep came easier now. The stars continued their slow dance outside her window, while inside, the first tentative roots of hope began to take hold in her heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as William tied his horse outside the blacksmith's shop. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil filled the air, along with the acrid smell of hot metal and coal smoke. He needed horseshoes for his bay mare, but the conversation he overheard made him forget all about them. Two men stood in the shadowy corner of the shop, their voices carrying over the din. William recognized them as friends of Nicole's father, Carter's. "Got it all figured," one said, leaning against a wooden post. "That girl's got rights to water shares through her ma's side." Judge Harlan already hinted he'd look kindly on the claim. "Ain't that the truth?" the other replied with a knowing chuckle. "Black won't know what hit him when Carter pulls that water right out from under him." William's hands tightened on the reins. The water rights to his creek had belonged to his family for 20 years. Without that water, his cattle wouldn't survive the summer. He'd known Nicole's mother came from an old ranching family, but he hadn't considered what inheritance rights might come with that bloodline. The blacksmith noticed William standing there and called out a greeting, but William was already turning away, his mind churning. He needed counsel, and there was only one person in town he truly trusted. The white-painted church stood quiet in the morning light. Inside, Preacher Halpern sat at his desk, reading his worn Bible. He looked up as William's shadow darkened the doorway. "William," the preacher said, marking his place with a ribbon, "something troubles you." William sank into a wooden pew, his usual composure cracking. "It's about Nicole," he began, and the whole story spilled out the overheard conversation. Carter's scheme, the water rights that could make or break his ranch. The preacher listened gravely, his fingers steepled under his chin. When William finished, he shook his head slowly. "Judge Harlan's reputation precedes him," he said. "He's known to favor men like Carter, men with money and influence. If Carter pursues this claim, he left the sentence unfinished. What can I do, William?" asked, his voice rough with worry. "Pray," the preacher answered, "and prepare. The law may not be on your side in this." The ride home seemed longer than usual. The creek that crossed his land sparkled in the afternoon sun, its water precious as diamonds now. William found Nicole in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with growing confidence. Flour dusted her arms, and her face showed concentration instead of fear. Such a change from the trembling girl he'd brought home weeks ago. "Nicole," he said gently, settling into a kitchen chair. "We need to talk about something important." She wiped her hands on her apron, anxiety flickering across her features. William explained what he'd heard, watching her face carefully as understanding. "Dawned, my father wants to use me to take your water." Nicole's voice quavered. But that's not right. "Ha! I don't want any part of hurting this ranch." Her hands twisted in her apron, leaving floury fingerprints. "This is my home now." The words hung in the air between them, surprising them both with their simple truth. "The judge might not see it that way," William said quietly. "Your father has influence with him." Nicole's shoulders slumped. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I'm bringing trouble to you, just like Pa always said I would." "Just a burden, no?" William's voice was firm. "You're not to blame for your father's schemes." But Nicole was already turning back to her bread dough, working it with renewed vigor. Her movements were precise, determined. When supper time came, she'd prepared not only fresh bread, but also a hearty stew and apple cobbler, more food than she'd ever attempted at once. "You didn't have to do all this," William said as they sat down to eat. "I wanted to," Nicole replied, her chin lifting. "Slightly, I can be useful. I can help." The words carried the weight of her father's accusations and her desire to prove them wrong. After the dishes were cleared, Nicole didn't retire to her room as usual. Instead, she asked, "Could you show me more about the cattle records?" "I could. Help keep the books straight." William studied her face in the lamplight. He saw not the scared girl from the courthouse steps, but a young woman finding her strength. "I'd appreciate that," he said simply. They sat at the kitchen table, ledgers open between them. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, and somewhere in town, men plotted against them. But in the warm circle of lamplight, Nicole and William worked together, each feeling the weight of the coming storm, yet drawing comfort from their shared determination to weather it. The evening wore on, filled with the scratch of pencil on paper and the quiet murmur of voices as William explained his bookkeeping system. Nicole absorbed every detail, her quick mind belying her lack of formal schooling. Yet beneath their focused work lay an undercurrent of worry. They both knew that powerful men were moving against them, and all their peaceful days of learning and growing might soon be tested by forces beyond their control. Nicole stood at the kitchen window, watching autumn leaves dance across the yard. The weight of their troubles pressed heavy, but an idea had been taking shape in her mind. She turned to William, who sat at the table reviewing his ledgers. "What if," she began hesitantly, then straightened her shoulders. "What if we hosted a harvest feast?" William looked up, surprise crossing his weathered features. "A feast? Yes." Nicole's words came faster now. "We could invite the townspeople, show them this ranch isn't what they think. Show them I'm not what they think." William considered this, his pencil tapping thoughtfully against the ledger. "It would be a lot of work," he said carefully, "and some folks might not come. But some might," Nicole insisted. "And those who do well, maybe they'd see the truth instead of rumors." Her hands twisted in her apron, but her voice stayed steady. "I can cook and clean and make everything nice." After a long moment, William nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We'll try it." The next days blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Nicole threw herself into the preparations with fierce determination. She rose before dawn to start bread dough, kneading it with practiced movements while the morning light crept across the kitchen floor. The yeasty smell filled the house, mingling with the sharp scent of vinegar as she scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. William helped too, hauling water for cleaning and setting up tables in the barn. He watched with quiet pride as Nicole directed each task with growing confidence. She was no longer the trembling girl from the courthouse steps. 3 days before the feast, Mrs. Halpern's buggy rattled into the yard. She stepped down carrying a basket of crisp white linens and a warm smile. "I thought you might need these," she said, setting the basket on the kitchen table, "and perhaps an extra pair of hands." Tears pricked Nicole's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, ma'am," she managed. "I'd surely welcome the help." Together, they worked through the afternoon. Mrs. Halpern showed Nicole how to fold the napkins into neat triangles and arrange wildflowers in mason jars. More importantly, she shared stories of her own early days on the frontier, making Nicole laugh despite her nervousness. "You know," Mrs. Halpern said as they hung lanterns in the barn, "I've seen how hard you've worked to learn and grow. The Lord sees it too." Nicole paused, a lantern swaying in her hands. "Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think I could read something at the feast?" From the Bible, Mrs. Halpern's face softened. "I think that would be wonderful." The day of the feast dawned clear and cool. Nicole had been up half the night, baking pies and setting everything in order. Wagons began arriving, kicking up dust as they rolled into the yard. She watched from the kitchen window, her heart pounding. William touched her shoulder gently. "Ready?" She nodded, smoothing her best dress, one Mrs. Halpern had helped her alter to fit properly. "Ready." The barn had been transformed. Lanterns cast a warm glow over long tables draped in white. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air. A few men had brought fiddles, and soon lively music mixed with the sound of voices. And laughter. Nicole moved among the guests, offering plates of food and warm welcomes. Some still gave her sideways looks, but others responded to her cheerful hosting with genuine smiles. She overheard one woman whisper, "Why, she's nothing like what they said in town." As the meal wound down, Nicole gathered her courage. Standing. At the head table, she cleared her throat. The conversations quieted. "I'd like to read something," she said, her voice shaky at first, but growing stronger. From Psalms.
Okay.
Opening the Bible William had been teaching her from, she found the marked page. "The Lord is my shepherd," she began, carefully sounding out each word, "I shall not want." Her voice carried clear through the barn as she read the familiar verses. When she finished, she looked up to find William beaming with pride. Mrs. Halpern wiped tears from her eyes, and several guests nodded approvingly. The evening ended with hymn singing, lantern light glowing golden on faces lifted in song. Nicole stood between William and Mrs. Halpern, her voice joining the others in amazing grace. The harmony swelled around her, and suddenly she felt it, a sense of belonging so strong it brought tears to her eyes. As the last wagons departed, their lanterns bobbing away into the darkness, Nicole helped William collect plates and cups. The yard was quiet now, but it felt like a friendly sort of quiet. "You did well tonight," William said softly. "Real well." Nicole smiled, remembering the warmth of acceptance she'd seen in many faces. "It felt right," she said, "like maybe I finally found where I belong." The harvest moon hung low and golden over the barn, its light touching everything with silver. Inside, the lanterns still glowed, and the lingering scent of pie and coffee drifted on the evening air. Nicole's heart felt as full as the moon itself, brimming with hope and the sweet taste of belonging. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Nicole hummed softly as she kneaded dough, her movements confident now after weeks of practice. The memory of last night's harvest feast still warmed her heart. She could almost hear the echo of hymns in the barn and feel the proud smile William had given her when she read from the Bible. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats shattered her peaceful reverie. William stepped onto the porch, his tall frame casting a long shadow. A rider galloped into the yard, his horse's flanks lathered with sweat. Nicole recognized him as young Tommy Jenkins from the general store, her hands stilled in the dough as she watched through the window. Tommy's face was grim as he handed William a folded paper. "Judge Harlan signed it this morning," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the open door. "They're saying you've got to return her to her PA." The mixing bowl slipped from Nicole's nerveless fingers, clattering against the wooden counter. She barely noticed the flour dusting her skirts as she stumbled to the doorway. William's face had gone, pale beneath his tan as he read the court order. His hands trembled slightly, making the paper rustle. "This ain't right," he muttered. "It ain't legal." Her pa got the judge's ear. Tommy continued, twisting his hat in his hands. "Been telling folks you stole his daughter and his water rights. Both. Judge Harlan's given him till sunset tomorrow to collect her. Nicole's legs gave way, and she sank onto the porch steps. The bright morning had turned dark as a storm cloud in her mind. She could see the courthouse steps again, feel the burning shame as the townsfolk jeered. Her father's voice rang in her ears, useless burden. William crumpled the paper in his fist. "Much obliged for the warning, Tommy," he said quietly. The young man nodded, wheeled his horse around, and galloped away. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Nicole stared at her flour-covered hands, remembering how they had just yesterday arranged flowers for the feast tables. How foolish she had been to think she could escape her father's cruel judgment. "We'll fight this," William said firmly, though his shoulders sagged as he sat beside her on the steps. "I won't let them take you back there." Nicole nodded mutely, but tears spilled down her cheeks. The morning stretched into afternoon, heavy with worry. She tried to continue her chores, but her hands shook too much to be useful. William rode out to consult the preacher, returning with a deeper frown creasing his forehead. Evening settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. The cheerful sounds of yesterday's feast were replaced by the mournful drone of cicadas in the gathering dark. Nicole pushed her supper around her plate, unable to eat. William barely touched his food either. "I reckon I was foolish," Nicole finally whispered, breaking the silence. "Thinking I could be more than what Pa says I am. Thinking I had any real worth." William's head snapped up, his eyes fierce. "Don't you say that? Don't you ever say that." He reached across the table and caught her hand. "You're worth more than any court order or cruel words. The Lord himself says you're precious in his sight." Fresh tears rolled down Nicole's cheeks. "But what if they make me go back? What if?" Her voice broke. "Listen to me," William said, his voice gentle but firm. "You ain't the same girl they sold on those courthouse steps. You can read now. You can run a kitchen and tend animals. You showed the whole town yesterday what kind of person you really are." Nicole tried to draw comfort from his words, but fear still clutched at her heart. After they cleared the dishes, she sat at the kitchen table with the primer William had used to teach her. With trembling fingers, she took a scrap of paper and carefully wrote out her name, Nicole. The letters were wobbly but clear proof that she had learned, had grown, had become more than her father's accusations. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her dress pocket. William watched from the doorway, his face etched with worry despite his encouraging words earlier. "Try to get some sleep," he said softly. "We'll figure something out tomorrow." Nicole climbed the stairs to her room, the first real room she'd ever had to herself. The quilt on her bed still smelled faintly of sunshine from being aired out for the feast. She changed into her nightgown and lay down, one hand clutching the paper with her name through the fabric of her pocket. Sleep was elusive. Every creak of the house made her start, imagining her father's heavy footsteps coming to drag her away. The cicadas continued their mournful song outside her window, a dreary lullaby that matched her fears. She thought of William teaching her to read, showing endless patience as she struggled with letters. She remembered Mrs. Halpern's kind smile at the feast, and the townspeople who had begun to look at her with respect instead of scorn. The life she had built here felt like a dream dissolving in the harsh light of morning. Nicole finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her fingers still pressed against the paper in her pocket, that small proof that she was someone who could write her own name, someone who had learned to believe in her own worth, someone who had, however briefly, found a true home. The cicadas sang on in the darkness, their chorus a reminder of how quickly joy could turn to sorrow, how fragile peace could be in a world where cruel men held power over the weak. But even in sleep, Nicole's hand remained curled protectively around her written name, as if those simple letters could somehow shield her from the storm that was coming. The eastern sky blushed pink as William hitched the horses to the wagon. His movements were deliberate, checking each buckle twice with careful attention. Nicole stood on the porch, clutching her shawl against the dawn chill. She had barely slept, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "Best we get moving," William said softly. "Court starts at 9 o'clock. The wagon creaked as Nicole climbed aboard. William's coat was freshly brushed, his beard trimmed neat, small efforts to present a respectable front. But his jaw was set in a hard line as he flicked the reins. Morning mist clung to the valley as they rode, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Nicole's hands twisted in her lap, worrying at the fabric of her best dress. She had chosen it carefully, the blue calico Mrs. Halpern had helped her alter for the harvest feast. "Remember what we practiced," William said, breaking the heavy silence. "Speak clear and true when the judge asks you questions. You got nothing to be ashamed of." Nicole nodded, though her throat felt too tight for words. The rising sun burned away the mist as they approached town, revealing clusters of people already gathering near the courthouse. The sight of the building's stark wooden facade made her stomach clench. William helped her down from the wagon, his strong hand steady despite the tension in his shoulders. Townsfolk parted before them, their whispers following like autumn leaves in the wind. Some nodded respectfully, remembering Nicole's gracious hosting at the feast. Others turned away, avoiding her eyes. A commotion at the far end of the street drew their attention. Nicole's father was approaching, mounted on a fine bay horse. His clothes were new, his beard freshly trimmed. The horse trader who had shown interest in Nicole rode beside him, both men radiating smug confidence. Judge Harlan stepped out onto the courthouse steps to greet them, his silver watch chain glinting in the morning sun. "Steady now," William murmured, his hand protective on Nicole's shoulder as they climbed the steps. The courthouse interior was already stifling despite the early hour, packed with curious onlookers. Nicole's legs trembled as she took her seat beside William on the wooden benches. Judge Harlan called the hearing to order, his gavel crack sharp as a gunshot. Nicole flinched at the sound. Her father's lawyer spoke first, his voice oily smooth, as he detailed her unlawful removal from paternal care. "The girl is underage," he declared, gesturing dramatically, "and her father has generous plans for her future, including a respectable marriage arrangement." The horse trader smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. William surged to his feet. When his turn came, "Your Honor, I bought Nicole fair and square from her own father's auction on these very steps. She's flourished at my ranch, learned reading and proper skills. Ask anyone who attended our harvest feast. A master can teach a dog tricks." Nicole's father interrupted with a sneer. "Don't make it human." "Order," Judge Harlan drawled, though his stern gaze fell more heavily on William than Nicole's father. "Continue, Mr. Black." William's voice grew passionate as he described Nicole's progress, her reading achievements, her kitchen skills, her gentle way with animals. "She deserves the dignity of choice," he concluded, "not to be traded like cattle." Nicole could feel the weight of stares pressing down on her. She closed her eyes briefly, lips moving in silent prayer. "Please, Lord," she whispered, "grant me courage." Judge Harlan leaned back in his chair, regarding them all with cold eyes. "This is a complex matter requiring careful consideration," he announced finally. "I will render my decision tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." His gavel fell again, dismissing them all into uncertainty. Outside, the autumn sun had climbed high, but Nicole felt chilled to her bones. Townspeople lingered on the courthouse steps, some approaching with kind words. Mrs. Halpern squeezed her hand, whispering prayers of encouragement. The preacher spoke quietly with William, their faces grave. Others stood in clusters, muttering doubts about William's right to keep her. Nicole caught fragments of their whispers, unnatural arrangement. "And who does he think he is?" Her father held court by the hitching post, laughing loudly with his supporters. "Pay them no mind," William said as he helped her into the wagon. But his own shoulders were heavy with worry as they started the long ride home. The sun wheeled across the sky as they traveled, neither speaking much. William broke the silence only once, his voice firm despite his evident exhaustion. "Whatever that judge says tomorrow, I won't give up fighting for you. You deserve a real home." Tears pricked Nicole's eyes, but she forced them back. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Dusk was settling when they finally reached the ranch. Lamplight glowed in the windows. Mrs. Halpern had kept the home fires burning in their absence, a small kindness that nearly undid Nicole's fragile composure. The older woman had left soup warming on the stove. But neither Nicole nor William had much appetite. They sat at the kitchen table, the lamp casting long shadows as night deepened outside. The familiar tick of the clock seemed to mock them, counting down the hours until morning's judgment. "Try to rest," William said finally, his voice gentle. The Lord's watching over us, even now. Nicole nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Flickered in the windows as she climbed the stairs, their warm light a reminder of all she stood to lose. Tomorrow would bring its verdict. But tonight, the ranch still felt like home. However tenuous that feeling might be. The wagon wheels crunched on gravel as William and Nicole returned to the ranch. Evening shadows stretched long across the yard, and the last rays of sunlight painted the western sky in streaks of amber and purple. William helped Nicole down from the wagon, his movements mechanical, his eyes distant. "I'll see to the horses," he said, his voice rough. "You go on inside and rest." Nicole nodded, watching as he led the team toward the barn. His shoulders, usually so straight and strong, seemed to sag beneath an invisible weight. She moved toward the house but paused at the door, her hand on the latch. Something in William's defeated posture tugged at her heart. Instead of going inside, she waited. After several minutes, she heard no sounds of William tending to the horses. Drawn by worry, she crossed the yard to the barn. The heavy door stood partially open, letting in strips of fading daylight that cut through the dusty air. She hesitated at the entrance, then heard something that made her breath catch, a muffled sob. Peering around the door, she saw William, kneeling beside a haystack, his broad frame bent low. His hands were clasped tight, and tears tracked down his weathered cheeks as he whispered desperate prayers. "Lord, I ain't never asked for much," his voice trembled. "But please, please don't let them take her. She's just starting to bloom here, like a flower finally getting sun. I can't bear to see her crushed again." Nicole stood frozen, never having seen such raw emotion from the steadfast rancher. William continued, his words breaking. "I know I failed Sarah and our little one. Maybe that's why you took them. But Nicole, she's a chance to make something right, to give a child a real home." He pressed his face into his hands. "I ain't strong enough to fight this alone, Lord. Help us, please." Moving quietly as she could, Nicole stepped into the barn. The straw rustled beneath her feet as she approached. Without a word, she knelt beside William, folding her hands in prayer. He startled slightly at her presence, but didn't pull away. Together, they knelt in the growing darkness, their prayers mixing with the evening sounds of crickets starting their nightly chorus. Nicole's own tears fell silently as she listened to William's heartfelt pleas. The barn air grew cooler as night settled in, but neither moved from their vigil. Finally, William's prayers faded to silence. The cricket song swelled to fill the void, a peaceful chorus in the gathering dark. Nicole felt a strange calm settle over her, despite the uncertainty ahead. The simple act of praying together had forged something new between them, a deeper trust. A shared hope. William stirred at last, wiping his eyes with a rough hand. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this," he said softly. "Don't be," Nicole answered. "It helps, knowing you're scared too." He turned to look at her, his expression softening. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "I've been working on a plan with Reverend Halpern and the notary." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "We've drawn up some papers, legal documents that might help protect you." Nicole's brow furrowed. "What kind of papers?" "The details ain't important right now," William said, his voice steadier than before. "But know that whatever happens tomorrow, I ain't giving up. The Lord provides paths we don't always see right away." Though she didn't fully understand, Nicole felt comforted by the renewed strength in his voice. The despair that had gripped him earlier seemed to have lifted. Replaced by quiet determination, William rose slowly, offering her his hand. "Come on," he said. "We should get some supper before it's full dark." They walked together to the house, where lamplight spilled warm and welcoming from the windows. Inside, William lit more lamps, while Nicole found bread and honey in the pantry. Neither felt like preparing a proper meal. But the simple fare seemed fitting for the moment. They sat at the kitchen table, the familiar wood worn smooth by years of use. The honey glowed amber in the lamplight as they spread it on thick slices of bread. Though neither spoke much, the silence felt peaceful rather than heavy. Each bite seemed precious. Each moment together, something to savor. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time's passage toward morning's judgment. Yet somehow its sound seemed less menacing than before. Nicole watched William's calm profile in the lamplight, drawing strength from his renewed composure. Whatever secret plan he had prepared, whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, with prayer, with dignity, and with faith that the Lord would light their path forward. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the ranch in pale golden light. Nicole stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun rise with dread heavy in her stomach. She had barely slept, tossing and turning as nightmares of being dragged away plagued her dreams. Her hands trembled as she braided her hair, trying to make herself presentable for whatever lay ahead. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made her freeze. Through the window, she saw a cloud of dust rising on the road, multiple riders coming fast. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized her father's distinctive bay stallion among them. Nicole Williams' steady voice called from below, "Best come down now." She descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like lead. William stood by the front door, his Bible in one hand and a leather folder in the other. His face was calm, but she noticed the tightness around his eyes. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "remember you have worth beyond measure in God's eyes." Nicole nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Together, they stepped out onto the porch just as the riders pulled up in the yard. Her father sat tall in his saddle, Sheriff Dunn beside him. Behind them, several townsfolk had followed, drawn by the promise of drama. "Get your things, girl," her father barked, swinging down from his horse. "You're coming home where you belong." Nicole instinctively stepped closer to William, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Sheriff Dunn dismounted more slowly, his expression troubled as he pulled a folded paper from his vest. "I've got the court order here. William," the sheriff said, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." The gathered crowd grew as more wagons arrived. Nicole recognized Mrs. Halpern among them, and several faces from the harvest feast. The morning air crackled with tension as William stepped forward, still gripping the leather folder. "Before you serve that order, Sheriff," William said, his voice carrying across the yard, "there's something you need to see." He opened the folder and withdrew several official-looking documents. Nicole's father sneered, but William ignored him, handing the papers to Sheriff Dunn. The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he began to read. "These are adoption papers," he announced, surprise clear in his voice. "Legally witnessed and notarized 3 days ago by Reverend Halpern and the county notary." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Nicole's own breath caught in her throat as she realized what William had done, what he had been preparing in secret. "Read it aloud," William commanded quietly. Sheriff Dunn cleared his throat. "This document certifies that William Black, being of sound mind and good standing, does hereby adopt as his lawful daughter one Nicole." His voice carried clearly in the stunned silence. Nicole's father's face turned purple with rage. "That's impossible. You can't just—" "I can, and I did," William cut him off. "These papers were filed and recorded before your court order. Nicole is my daughter now, legally and properly adopted. You have no claim on her anymore." The sheriff studied the documents carefully, then nodded. "These are legitimate, properly witnessed and filed. The adoption supersedes any previous guardianship." He looked at Nicole's father grimly. "Your court order is void, Thomas. The girl belongs here now." "No." Her father roared, taking a threatening step forward. "I won't stand for this. You tricked me, Black." "The only trick," William said evenly, "was thinking you could treat a child like property to be sold and reclaimed at will." His voice hardened. "Nicole is my daughter now, protected by law and love. Best you ride away and remember that." Nicole's father looked wildly around at the gathered crowd, seeking support, but found none. Even those who had previously sided with him seemed impressed by William's clever maneuvering. Mrs. Halpern was beaming openly, and several others nodded in approval with a string of bitter curses. Her father swung back onto his horse. "You'll regret this, Black," T snarled, wheeling his mount around. "Both of you will." He spurred his horse hard, sending dirt flying as he galloped away. The tension broke like a summer storm passing. Nicole's legs gave way, and she sank to her knees on the porch, tears streaming down her face. William knelt beside her, strong arms supporting her as she sobbed with relief. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now. You're home." The crowd began to disperse, talking excitedly among themselves. Sheriff Dunn tipped his hat to William before mounting up. "You did good, William," he said quietly. "Real good." Then he too rode away, leaving them alone. The day passed in a blur for Nicole. She moved through her chores in a daze, still struggling to believe what had happened. As evening approached, she found herself in the kitchen, automatically helping William prepare their supper. The familiar routine of slicing bread and setting the table anchored her. William moved around the kitchen with his usual quiet efficiency. But there was a new lightness to his step. When they finally sat down to their simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, the house felt different, more settled, more permanent. William bowed his head to say grace, and Nicole closed her eyes. Her heart so full it hurt. "Lord," William prayed, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for bringing this child into my home and for making her truly my daughter. Bless this food and this family. Amen." "Amen," Nicole whispered, opening her eyes to find William watching her with gentle affection. They ate in peaceful silence, broken only by the gentle clink of spoons and the distant lowing of cattle. The evening light streamed golden through the windows, filling the kitchen with warmth. Nicole felt the last of her fear melting away, replaced by a deep sense of belonging. Here at last was her true home. Her true father, earned not through blood, but through love and choice. The simple supper tasted better than any feast, seasoned with the salt of joyful tears and the sweetness of freedom. The next morning dawned bright and clear, washing the ranch in golden light. Nicole woke before the rooster's crow, a smile spreading across her face as remembrance flooded in. She was free, truly free. No more fear of her father's cruel claims. No more dread of being torn away. She was William Black's daughter now, protected by law and love. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, eager to start the day. The wooden floors creaked softly under her feet as she made her way downstairs. William was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Morning, Nicole," he said warmly, sliding one cup toward her. "Sleep well." "Better than I ever have," she replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. The rich aroma of coffee filled her nose, mingling with the scent of fresh-baked biscuits. After breakfast, Nicole hurried out to tend the chickens. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn. She scattered feed with renewed vigor, watching the hens peck and scratch. These simple chores that had once felt like burdens now brought her joy. Each task was a reminder that she belonged here, that this was her home. William called her over to help mend a broken fence line later that morning. They worked side by side, Nicole holding the post steady while William hammered. The rhythmic sound of metal striking metal echoed across the pasture. "Come spring," William said, pausing to wipe his brow, "we'll plant more corn in the south field. Maybe some pumpkins, too." He glanced at her. Would you like to learn about crop rotation? Nicole nodded eagerly. Yes, please. And she hesitated. Then pressed on. Could we continue with the scripture reading too? William's face softened. Of course. You're doing well with your letters. Soon you'll be reading whole chapters on your own. The following week, they rode into town for supplies. Nicole sat straighter in the wagon this time, no longer trying to hide from curious eyes. The streets were busy with morning traffic, and she noticed how differently people looked at her now. Where there had once been sneers and whispers, she saw respectful nods. Several townspeople called out friendly greetings. Even those who had once mocked her seemed impressed by her quiet dignity in the face of recent events at the general store. Mrs. Halpern rushed forward to embrace Nicole warmly. "My dear girl," she said, holding Nicole at arm's length to look at her. "How well you look. God has blessed you indeed." A group of children playing marbles nearby waved shyly at Nicole. She waved back, remembering how recently she would have expected only taunts from them. Their innocent acceptance touched her heart deeply. William moved through the store, gathering supplies. When he came to the dry goods section, he paused by a bolt of pretty blue calico. "Pick out enough for a new dress," he said to Nicole. "A proper young lady needs proper clothes." Nicole ran her fingers over the soft fabric, tears pricking her eyes. "Are you sure?" she whispered. William nodded firmly. "You deserve nice things, Nicole. Never doubt that." They returned home as the sun was setting, the wagon loaded with supplies and the precious fabric carefully wrapped in brown paper. After helping William unload, Nicole stepped out onto the porch alone. The evening air was sweet with sage, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. She clasped her hands together, looking up at the vast expanse above. "Thank you, Lord," she said softly but clearly. "Thank you for giving me a real family, for bringing me to this place, to this Father who shows me your love." Behind her, the screen door creaked softly. William stood in the doorway, listening silently. Nicole turned to find his eyes shining with unshed tears, his broad shoulders outlined against the lamplight from within. No words were needed between them. Their hearts were full with the simple miracle of belonging to each other. Winter settled over the Colorado ranch like a thick blanket, turning the familiar landscape into a wonderland of white. Frost sparkled on fence posts, and the horse's breath came out in cloudy puffs against the crisp December air. On Christmas Eve, lanterns flickered in the windows of the small wooden church, casting warm light onto the snow outside. Nicole sat, straight-backed in her new blue calico dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap as the congregation gathered. The familiar scents of pine boughs and beeswax candles filled the air. When Reverend Halpern called for the first hymn, Nicole rose steadily to her feet. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice rang out clear and strong as she began Silent Night. The notes floated up to the rafters, unwavering and pure. This was the same church where townsfolk had once whispered about her in scorn. Yet, here she stood, leading them in worship. William watched from his pew, pride and emotion evident on his weathered face. Tears glistened in his eyes as his daughter's voice filled the small space. One by one, other voices joined in, creating a harmony that seemed to make the very walls glow with warmth. Nicole's cheeks flushed with joy, no longer from shame, but from the simple pleasure of belonging. After the service, neighbors gathered around them, offering Christmas wishes and warm handshakes. Mrs. Halpern pressed a small package of cookies into Nicole's hands, while others spoke kindly of her singing. Even the sheriff, who months ago had delivered such threatening news, nodded respectfully in their direction. The ride home was peaceful, their way lit by a swaying lantern and countless stars. Hooves crunched softly in the snow as their wagon made its way along the familiar trail. Nicole huddled close to William under the thick buffalo robe, comfortable in the silence. "Nicole," William said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I reckon God knew what he was doing when he brought you to me, gave me a second chance at being a father." He cleared his throat. At being whole again, Nicole squeezed his hand tightly, smiling through happy tears. No words were needed to express her agreement. Back at the ranch, they shared a simple supper of beef stew and cornbread by the crackling fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as they ate, both savoring the peaceful moment. Afterward, Nicole settled onto her quilted bed, listening to the familiar sounds of William banking the fire for the night. From the other room came the soft murmur of William's voice as he knelt for his evening prayers. The words were indistinct, but she could hear the gratitude in his tone. Nicole pulled her quilt closer, feeling truly at peace for the first time in her life. She was home. She was loved. She was daughter to a good man and to God himself. The long nightmare of her past had given way to this beautiful reality. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.